a beautiful night in the hood. It's a beautiful night in the hood. Gonna be hanging out in the hood.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
There are 413 sets of brothers that have played Major League Baseball. There can be more than one brother. And the remarkable thing, if you look at the alphabetical listing, is the first set of brothers in there is Hank Aaron and his brother Tommie,
Who have the distinction of leading all, pairs of brothers in home runs. Now, I think the vast majority of them can be attributed to Hammer and Hank.
755 for Hank and 13 for Tommie. They are the greatest home run hitting combination of brothers ever.
But mostly Hank.
At the end of the list are the Zimmerman brothers. So Jeff Zimmerman and Jordan Zimmerman, both of whom have played in your lifetime.
Yes, no, I know Jordan. I don't know Jeff as much.
Yeah, so and he was the less accomplished of the two players, and I think that's going to be a theme of this podcast because it turns out that one brother seems to really make it, and the other brother not so much.
I can think of a handful off the top of my head where you could say both of them are actually pretty good players.
Right.
But there's not a lot of those.
No. And a lot of times we found when we went through the list that they didn't play at the same time. So one brother could have come up and been knocked out, quickly or played for a lot of years. And then later on, the younger brother came up for a cup of coffee or something like that. But rarely do you have two guys have
both play
major league seasons.
Interestingly, there is a pair. I know of at least one pair of brothers playing now that is both playing and active. And they're even both good players in the Seager brothers. You have Kyle and Corey. And both of them are Corey's an unbelievable player. I don't think Kyle...
No, Kyle actually was thought of for a while as an up-and-coming star, and I think he's got, solid major league stats.
But Corey's become,
the better of the two players.
In Los Angeles. But still, both of them are current good contributing players for their teams, which is not common among brother pairs.
Right. We'll talk about a bunch of brothers, and then kind of near the end, we'll talk about maybe some of the most notable brother combinations in terms of their brotherly accomplishments,
Correct.
if you will. But there are some, guys that we know that are around today whose fathers were Major League ball players, and we're not going to do a father-son thing, but Felipe Alou, who is the father of Met manager Luis Rojas, and his brothers Matty and Jesus all played for the same team at the same time.
That's weird. That's probably one of the few examples of three brothers all playing for the same team at the same time.
I think it's the only time that happened, and they did set the record for the most games appeared in by brothers with 5,129 combined games played. I think that far exceeds anybody else, any other combination, and having three of them. And by the way, the most accomplished player was probably Matty of the three, and he was an all-star. Felipe was a good solid hitter. Jesus, when I looked at his career, it was shorter than I remembered, and I remember he had a very weird batting stance and kind of less accomplished. I think he had a very low OBA, and he batted 270 or 280 or something like that at the time. But they all had long careers, and the cool thing was that they all played together for the Giants.
Well, another pair, and interesting, moving from a fielding set of brothers to a pitching duo, were the Necro brothers, because you have Phil and Joe, who are both very good pitchers. Phil's in the Hall of Fame.
Well, and not only were they very good pitchers, they were both knuckleballers.
They were both. I thought only Phil was the knuckleballer.
No, they both were knuckleballers. So I think Phil's was better than Joe's, and then Joe used other pitches to a greater degree. I think there were a time when Phil threw, 90% knuckleballs with the occasional fastball. So those guys were, and they have lots of combined wins between them, and were all-star pitchers, in their leagues as well. So I think that's a good example of guys that I think they're not on our list. They are on our list. So their combined WAR was 126, and so that's pretty good for pitchers. And it is that Phil was the primary knuckler. I think Joe experimented, but Joe won 221 games and Phil won 318. That's a lot of games.
That is a lot of games.
But only one is in the Hall of Fame.
Only one, and then of course, what's more common than where you have Phil and Joe, and you had the Alou brothers, is you have the one brother that's really good, and then the other guy that they brought up kind of as a favor to the brother, like Barry Larkin.
Yeah, right.
So Barry Larkin, who was obviously an unbelievable shortstop for the Reds for a ton of years. But did you know he had a brother named Steve who appeared in one game?
Steve Larkin. No, I can't say I'm familiar with Steve Larkin.
Managed to get a hit, went 1 for 3.
Okay. And that was it.
Oh, never played another game.
Never played. And there's a theme there too. There's some weird. We'll go through some weird, occurrences with brothers. And like Gordon said, it seems like sometimes like the other brother was brought onto the team as sort of a favor, because in the case of Steve Larkin, he came to the Reds when Barry Larkin was on the Reds and got his one game with the Reds when his brother was there. And you had to think that was sort of a favor to an all-time great Red, is we'll bring your brother up for a game.
Yeah, exactly.
And that happened again to a couple of Mets, believe it or not. And you don't identify, Tommy Glavine, Hall of Fame pitcher, and wasn't at his best with the Mets. We'll just kind of leave it at that for now.
He was there in the twilight of his career.
But did you know that Mike Glavine,
I did not.
Mike Glavine played 6 games with the Mets in 2003. Of course, Tommy was on the team at that time. Mike went 1 for 7 and never played Major League Baseball after that.
I mean, yeah, you have, interestingly, that 2 Hall of Fame pitchers for the Braves in the 90s both had brothers that named Mike that went on to do stuff in Major League Baseball. Mike Glavine, obviously,
not so much as a player.
But Mike Maddox.
Well, Mike Maddox as a pitcher was not a lousy pitcher. He was a good Major League pitcher.
And he went on to be a very good pitching coach.
I think he had more success as a pitching coach and more notoriety as a pitching coach.
But he wasn't his brother.
So he wasn't. He's not a Hall of Famer. So there's a few guys that are interesting. And I always like talking about these guys because I remember watching at least 2 of them play. And those would be the Paciorek brothers. And you have to spell Paciorek because it's not that easy, but I won't bother.
Yeah.
So Jim played 48 games for Milwaukee in 1987. Okay, he is the middle brother. Tom played 18 seasons.
This is a pretty respectable number.
Right, and he went from 1970 until 1987. No, he did not play on the Milwaukee team with his brother as a favor, but that's the only season that his brother Jim played in. But the other one that's the most interesting. So Tom had 18 Major League seasons. He was an all-star. He had 282. This was a good Major League player. Yeah. Okay, and then there was John Paciorek. And I never really heard of John Paciorek, and when I looked at it, I think I know why. He's the eldest. He played in 1 Major League game in 1963. So that's a long time before, that's 7 years before his younger brother, middle brother, and Tom is the middle brother, comes up and plays for the Colt 45s. He goes 3 for 3. He scores 4 runs. And he never plays another Major League game.
It's weird that he would be that. You think like, okay, wait, do we just give him another day? Like, he played really well, obviously.
I think he has the distinction of having the most perfect Major League career, because I don't know anybody in history that has 3 for 3. That's 1,000 in more than like 1 at bat or something like that.
Right. He's got 3 Major League at bats, scored 4 runs. So that means he drew a walk.
Yeah, right. He got on base and a walk probably. Yeah, but never got what did he do?
It's weird, but I mean that's not even the weirdest one. I think we discovered the weirdest one we had heard of this morning with Robin Yount.
Robin Yount. So yeah, Robin Yount, Hall of Famer, right? Career WAR of 77, and he played multiple positions, center field and shortstop. So doing both of those things like Biggio made him kind of special as well. His unknown, I guess, but for most people, older brother came up in 1971, so that's 3 years before Robin starts his career. And as a pitcher, he is credited with being in 1 game but had no stats. So we had to look it up.
Yeah, because how do you do that? We're like, did he pick somebody off?
Go to Baseball Reference, right?
He's got a game.
Look him up, and it says he was in 1 game in that year. He pitched no innings, had no innings pitched. He had no stats and all that kind of stuff. How the heck? So what did he do? So what was your first reaction? What did you think?
Pick off.
Right, because when maybe they wouldn't cover that. You think that would come like a fielding stat.
Right, and then we thought, okay, was it a favor? I then thought it was a favor to Robin. Like, oh, we'll bring him up, and they were like, oh, he starts an inning, and then they just sub him before he ever throws a pitch. But this was before he came up.
I guess if you were a hitter, that could happen. Right, so if you're a hitter, they announce you, and then they bring in another pitcher, and then they replace you, and you never actually bat.
Yeah.
But with the pitcher, I thought you had to throw a pitch, and as it turns out, that is correct. So what happened in the case of
the eldest Yount brother.
Of the eldest of Larry Yount, and I just looked like Larry Yount. He was on the mound, elbow felt a little tight in the bullpen. He thinks, okay, I'll just go to the mound. They bring him in. He throws a couple warm-up pitches.
Pain doesn't go away.
He can't go. He's got a signal for the trainer. They take him out of the game, but because he was announced as the relief pitcher, he gets credit for being in a Major League game, even though he never threw a pitch.
Which is that's just interesting in and of itself.
Right. So how the stats go. So there's a few other interesting guys. I remember watching a player growing up named Vic Davalillo, left-handed hitter for the Pirates and the Cardinals, I believe. Particularly good as a pinch hitter. He batted .279 in his 15-year career. And he had a brother. I never heard of his brother. And his brother's name, and this is classic, his brother's name was Yo-Yo Davalillo. And I love that.
I mean, that is quite the name.
Yo-Yo played 19 games for the terrible 1963 Senators, somehow hitting .293, and that was enough for the Senators not to bring him back, and he never played another Major League season.
Went on to have a very accomplished cello career. Wait, no, that was somebody else.
That's somebody else. So, but, you think he hit .293 in 1963, the hitting was not, big, or it was okay. Why wouldn't you give the guy another chance? Somebody give him a chance.
The guy that went 3 for 3.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what did he do wrong?
He got no chance.
Now, I remember one of these next two guys because I actually remember him as a pretty decent player. At least one season I thought he must have had that was pretty good, and that was Julio Lugo.
Right.
But I didn't know he had a brother.
Neither did I.
They also played for the same team. His brother, is it
Ruddy Lugo, and that's what caught my eye. Ruddy Lugo,
right? And then in 2006, he got traded to the Dodgers, so they played like 76 games.
No, he played in the Rays with him.
And then he got traded to the Dodgers halfway through the season.
Right.
So he only played like half a season with his brother.
Right.
So that must have been pretty cool.
He only played a couple of years, so he comes up and his brother's on the team. And they probably go through spring training together. And his brother Ruddy pitched in 64 games, so it was some middle relief pitcher or something like that. And then all of a sudden, it's been great playing with you. They just traded me to the Dodgers.
Yeah, bye.
And so off to the other coast he goes. Yeah, that was I thought somewhat notable.
So there was another name that caught my eye in this list because we've had Yo-Yo. We've had Ruddy, but I think the top name has to go to Honus Wagner's brother. Now, Honus Wagner obviously is one of the most unbelievable baseball players of all time. His stats are nuts when you look at them.
Right.
But little is it known that he had a brother played only in 74 games for two teams in 1896. So we're going way back. Now, what do you think his brother's name was?
No chance.
I don't know why you would do this to your kid. Butts.
Well, that had to be a nickname. It's like his parents named the guy Butts.
Maybe they did.
That was probably his baseball name.
He was known as Butts Wagner.
Butts Wagner. So, yeah, Honus had a career WAR of 130.8. Butts Wagner had no WAR. 0 WAR.
He was the replacement player.
But he played for two different teams, and he played in the year before Honus came up. So he comes up in 1896, and that's his only season. Honus comes up in 1897 and plays 21 years.
I mean, honestly, if I was the teams, I'm like, well, this has to be the brother. Look at what the other one's named. The parents could not have liked this kid.
So the other one that we didn't talk about is, and we talk about this player because he's an almost player, and I think
a lot of people would say
I kind of favor him as being in the Hall of Fame.
If the major leagues put in the right number of players, he'd be in the Hall of Fame.
Dick, not Richie Allen, who played from 63 to 77. And he had, not to my knowledge, I didn't realize this, two brothers that played Major League Baseball. Hank Allen, okay, never heard of him, played in 7 Major League seasons, although he skipped one in the middle of all that. I don't know really why, from 66 to 73.
But still, played 7 seasons.
7 seasons, his brother played. So Ron Allen, and he's the younger brother, played 7 games in 10 days in one season, from August 11th to August 21st.
Was he on the same team as Dick?
No, not on the same team. In 1972, and he never played again. So think of it, you're the younger brother.
It must have been some like emergency injury situation.
Kind of like the Mets outfield this year.
Where like you were
Vargas
just like,
is out there playing for a while.
You're going to get 7 games because literally everybody else on the team has died or something.
I just think that's kind of being the third brother there and having the other guys have that kind of history and success, and you being the guy. It's got to be hard, right? For the brother that didn't do it, and most of the time that's the way that it goes.
It's not like when you have like Hank who played 7 seasons. He could kind of stand there and be like, no, I was a major league player on my own. I wasn't as good as my brother,
right.
But I was a major league player.
Didn't get a pension.
But still, he played for 7 years. It's not like he played for 7 games.
Yeah, right. 7 games is just, it's like I could have been something, but it didn't work out. The last guy the last guys in this place, and I remember watching both of them play, or their sons play. You probably didn't see. So Jerry Hairston Sr. I knew of because he had Jerry Hairston Jr. when Jerry was playing.
And Jerry Hairston Jr. was a good ball player.
And Sr. was a good ball player too. He had a brother that I didn't know about. Johnny Hairston did the older senior, but Jerry had 2 sons
who both made it into them. So it's weird that you you have fathers and sons
right.
and brothers.
Jerry had two sons, Scott Hairston and Jerry Hairston. I think Scott Hairston played for the Mets as well.
He did
late in his career. And
I do remember Scott. He wasn't as good as Jerry.
Right, but a right-handed bat off the bench, and again, very interesting. And maybe we'll do a fathers and sons episode, considering this is a father and son podcast. As you pointed out this morning, we kind of missed our opportunity on Father's Day to do that. So,
but I think now you can kind of get into like the guys for the most part that were actually pretty good, both of them. Like there's definitely like you have like the brother that was good, and then his brother that got in because his brother was good, and then you have the guys that were both actually legit guys.
Right.
And so I'm kind of surprised. Like this is one I would think of as like, to me, this is somebody that group 2 that would be near the top. Sandy and Roberto Alomar.
Absolutely.
Because Sandy was an all-star and Roberto was an all-star.
And you maybe don't know that there was a Sandy Alomar Sr.
Right.
So these are his sons.
Yes.
Okay.
But Roberto is a Hall of Famer and one of the best ever to play second base. Sandy was a good catcher.
Right. Not
he's a guy that would be almost in the Hall of Very Good.
Yeah.
He's not quite in the Hall of Very Good.
He was part of those great late 90s Indians teams at catcher with guys that just would mash.
And I do remember he was also a pretty good player for the White Sox for a couple years.
And he played with his brother Roberto, so I think that's kind of cool.
So they were both really good. And I think those are two guys that are kind of like, in my mind, good to start out with, because obviously we already mentioned the Alous and the Necros.
Right.
But I mean, there's still more than that, because, they're still playing today too. And I think you have to mention them as another ones that would be kind of near the top. And that's the Molina brothers.
Yeah. Well, I guess is Yadier the only one still playing? I don't think.
Right. I don't think
Benji are playing.
Benji, yeah. And obviously Yadier just actually surpassed Brooks Robinson and somebody else for the highest accumulated defensive WAR.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so now he's number 1 all time.
Yadier is not an almost guy. However, any of the other Molina brothers are definitely almost
Yadier
guys
is
at best.
Yadier should be a first ballot.
And Benji was probably before you really started watching.
I remember Benji near the very end of his career because he played with those Giants teams
Good
in the late
defensive catcher.
2000s. But he was ancient by that point.
Right.
Because I remember that was a whole thing with that Giants team that made the World Series in 2002, because I think he was the catcher for that team, but he could only play like half the games.
Yeah. Very good. So how about, what might be considered for brothers and for old-time baseball fans, the number 1 grouping and something of the DiMaggio brothers. And I think it's hard for people to, if you got to go back and look at the stats, because even if you knew there were 3 brothers and you knew they all played, Joe was such a better player than everyone. Vince was a very good major league player.
I thought Dom was the better of the other two.
I think Vince was the more accomplished player between Vince and Dom. But they missed time in the military, so it had. I think actually you're right that Dom is. He had a 31.8 WAR. You're right, and 17 for Vince. So because
I remember Dom was thought of as like he was like the problem is he just wasn't Joe DiMaggio.
Right.
That's the problem, is that when your brother's Joe DiMaggio, it's really tough. Somebody else that probably felt it, and it was probably even harder because he was the older brother, was Ramon.
Oh, absolutely. Ramon Martinez.
And his younger brother, Pedro. And it's gotta suck because you come up, you're the talented prospect Ramon Martinez. People think you're going to be.
He was a great prospect. They really thought he was going to be a major league star, and he was a good pitcher for a while.
He wasn't because Pedro's nickname, was he the Dominator?
Who's that?
Pedro.
No, I don't know that Pedro had a nickname like that.
I thought he had one like that.
But he was a dominator.
He was, oh my God, one of the best pitchers of all time.
One of my favorite memories going to watch a game at Fenway Park. I watched Pedro Martinez make the Minnesota Twins look silly in a 12 strikeout, 1-hit shutout. And it looked like a major leaguer pitching to little leaguers.
Honestly, the guy that reminds me most of Pedro in the major leagues right now?
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
DeGrom. They pitched kind of similarly too.
So in one of our first episodes, we talked about the guys that made into the Hall of Fame that we think maybe were questionable.
Yes,
and in fact, I was reading some Bill James today, and he listed Bill Mazeroski as a guy at the top of his list who shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. Right. We said it was that one home run in this 60 World Series.
That's the difference, because the thing for Mazeroski is that's not just any home run.
Right. But Paul Waner, Big Poison, and his brother Lloyd Waner, Little Poison, both are in the Hall of Fame, and they are the only playing brothers, as I think there was like a manager or somebody back in the 1800s the Wright brothers who made it in the Hall of Fame, but not as players. So Lloyd Waner was the lesser of the two players, and many of us, including you and me, feel like he kind of got in the coattails of his brother's career.
One was a poison to the other team. One was kind of more poison to his team.
So, but they get credit because they played for so long, and they're both in the Hall of Fame. They can't not be on any list like that. So, what else you got?
I think another one we have to mention, and I will admit at one point I thought these were both the same person because I thought one of these was a nickname, were the Dean brothers, because you have Paul and Dizzy. Definitely thought it was Paul Dizzy Dean at one point when I was a kid.
Yeah, and Paul didn't have as much success as did Dizzy, and we talked about with Gary Livicari last week in our podcast about the All-Star game, how Dizzy got hit in the toe in the All-Star game, altered his pitching motion, and that basically ruined his career, ruined his arm, and he was never the same.
Mm-hmm.
But Dizzy, because of being such a colorful guy, also could have been on the list by himself as a brother because he was that nutty.
Yeah.
So as an announcer, he made up words like slud, and he slud into third base, and he just was known for his
I mean, and it wasn't like
malapropisms more than anything else.
And it wasn't like Paul was bad. He still managed to accumulate like 12 WAR, but like he wasn't his brother.
Yeah, I think at one point Dizzy went out in the doubleheader and pitched a one-hitter in game one, and Paul pitched the second game, pitched a no-hitter. After the game, he goes, "If I'd have known that Paul was going to pitch a no-hitter, I'd have thrown one too." I
remember that because I think that was in the strange but true baseball stories I used to read as a kid that you gave me.
I love that story. So I also was a big fan, and I went and looked at their careers. The Perry brothers. And we talked about Gaylord Perry and his Me and the Spitter in our Sticky Stuff episode because he was a guy who threw the spitter and admitted it after his career. He also, to the tune of 318 wins or 314 wins in a 3.11 career ERA. Gaylord Perry was a first ballot Hall of Famer, if I'm not mistaken. But his brother Jim had a really good career, and he won over 200 games, and he had a 6-year period of excellence where he won the Cy Young one year.
Yeah, you don't. He's close. They're closer to being like the Alomars, or the DiMaggios, where like one brother was obviously a Hall of Famer, but the other brother was still a really good player.
And it's Jay Jaffe who talks about having 7 straight years of dominance, and it's interesting that Jim Perry had 6, and it almost is what holds him back from being a Hall of Famer.
Because if you shorten that time span, the dominance has to be so much more pronounced.
Right.
You have to be that much more unbelievable than everybody else in that time frame.
So it wasn't before my time because they played when I was a little kid, but I remember like the first baseball player I was really a fan of was Ken Boyer, who came from the Cardinals to the Mets sort of late in his career, and was, when you get the guy late in his career, was never the player that he was before, but you knew he had a really good,
You knew he was a good player.
Right. So Ken and his brother Cleet Boyer, who played for the Yankees. So they
wasn't Cleet actually a pretty good player too?
Yeah. They both were really good fielders. And then they had the third brother who I'd never heard of, Cloyd. That's Cloyd. Anyway, you got one brother.
Was that just like a misspelling of Floyd on the birth certificate?
You got one brother named Cleet. I guess you can name the other one Cloyd.
Ugh.
And but Cloyd went 20-23 in 111 games. So he played like as did Hank Allen. Enough to
was Cloyd the simple brother? Because I feel like that's what you named the simple one of the three.
That's mean.
Cloyd, get in here.
But those guys, Cleet in particular, was like Brooks Robinson on defense. But I think Ken Boyer was the better. But
he was a better hitter, right?
Right. They were, and I think he won an MVP. He did 1964.
And then I think you're really down to one last pairing where they were both, somewhat one was a Hall of Famer, the other was a somewhat accomplished major league player, and that was Ken and George Brett.
Yeah.
Because obviously George Brett, 3,000 hits. Was he a first ballot?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And had the 390 season, only 117 games, by the way, and he drove in. He almost led the league in RBIs, but didn't get enough games to get over 100 RBIs, even though they played 117. That was a monster year.
That sounds like a monster season.
He did it for. So his brother Ken, and I remember him as a better pitcher than as a pitcher itself. He was an okay pitcher. The dude could rake. He hit home runs.
They were like, it was like one of those things of like, why doesn't he just play the field?
Had it been today with Mr. Ohtani, Ken Brett might have been hitting as much as he was pitching, although he probably would have had to have been a better pitcher.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's the kind of thing where it was just like, what, like where they were just like, okay, DeGrom, you're not that great, of a fielder and a hitter. Let's try you on the mound.
Could you imagine that? It's just
Maybe Ken. Maybe we just see what could happen if you play the field and start hitting every day.
So if you go down the list, and we won't do that, you just recognize one of the two names most of the time as you scroll down. You can go to baseball-almanac.com.
To me, that's kind of why in my mind, if I'm ranking them in my head, it's hard not to put either the Perrys or the Alomars on top. Because both of the not Hall of Fame brothers were actually good quality.
Right. They were both excellent players.
Yeah.
Not one was really good and the other guy just showed
kind of
up.
was there. Like, he put together 11 WAR. No, like Sandy and Jim Perry won 215 games and a Cy Young.
So we have, our fantasy team, which is the worst.
Nobody, we can't talk about our fantasy team. Nobody wants to hear about our fantasy
really
baseball
bad at
team.
fantasy, apparently, at least this season. So Max Stassi is our catcher, which we got, and I had no idea that Max has a brother named Brock. So there's lots of guys, if you go through current players, who actually have their brother, and if you remember Travis d'Arnaud's brother, Chase.
Yep.
These guys are still active, even if some of them are not necessarily playing in the major leagues. They're still trying to get back to the major leagues.
But they will get up there, and they will be part of those. Well, there was the Atlanta Braves catcher Travis d'Arnaud and his brother Chase, who played in like 3 games for some team one year.
Cal Ripken Jr. back with the Orioles. His brother Billy Ripken was a major league player, played second base for the Orioles for a long time, but not anywhere near his brother.
He was not
pretty good double play combination to be playing with your brother.
Must have been pretty cool.
And their dad was the manager.
That's weird.
Their dad was the manager. Cal Ripken Sr. was the manager. I remember exactly which years in the 90s sometimes.
That's weird.
Yeah. So
God, I would feel like that would be so like it wouldn't be weird with like as long as both of the brothers were playing well, but as soon as they started struggling, I feel like it would be such a weird clubhouse to be in.
So they right. They and Cal managed for a long time, and I don't think he had to cut his son Billy, but he might have at one point had to send him packing. So that's got to make dinner conversation.
I don't know if that's
Sunday dinner might not be the same.
It's the kind of thing you never let go. Billy, can you pass the potatoes? I don't know. Could he not have cut me?
So Eddie Murray, Hall of Famer. I didn't know his brother Rich Murray. Right, so you can go through these Hall of Fame guys.
I feel like it's at a certain point you're like, oh, he had a brother apparently. Nobody knew that.
Played Major League Baseball. How about that? I didn't know that. So, but we think that the guys got a chance sometimes because their brother was a major league player, and they might get an opportunity, maybe the way Glavin's brother might have,
or Steve Larkin,
or Larkin saying, "Hey,"
and it makes sense because in the span of a 162 game season, giving some guy's brother an at bat when he's done so much for you as a franchise. Because even if the other players probably won't be too annoyed because they're going to love the player that's been on their team and they see it a way as honoring their career.
As long as he doesn't come and take anybody's job.
Right. If he comes in and, obviously it's a little different if they bring, but you know what? If the guy came in and was a revelation and stored somebody's job, only one guy is annoyed about that. The guy that lost the job. Everybody else is like, cool, this guy's great.
So yeah, I think most brother combinations will continue to be the way it's been in the past.
Yeah.
The good one and the one who wishes he was the other one.
It's rare to have two standouts. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at Almost Cool.